Good evening, wrestling fans, and welcome to the Two Bros Wrestling Show. We're back! And by we, I mean, me, as you can see. We were on a bit of a summer hiatus. Hopefully, you all have had a good summer. At the end of your summer, I spent several weeks myself traveling, and during that time, I had really no access to Wi-Fi and no idea what was happening in the world of professional wrestling. So, I kind of know how Doug feels every day. Hey, he doesn't have to be here to be subjected to my abuse. So, Doug Slam, as you can see, running solo tonight. Doug's in the midst of a move that he's mentioned on the air a few times, and we hope to have him back with us next week. So, tonight, though, we're going ahead since it's been almost a month since we've been with you guys, and want to get back on air. And tonight, we're going to talk in our main event topic, Ultimate Warrior. So, running solo could use your help. If you've had any comments or memories of Ultimate Warrior or some of the discussion points as we go through, if it targets anything in your mind, questions you might have, feel free to drop those in the comments, and we'll do what we can to address those. But first, let's start as we always do with some news in our opening bell segment. Running the sound effects as well as running the live stream. How about that? Who needs Doug? Actually, folks, we want to start out with some breaking news. And when I mean breaking, I mean within the last 30 minutes type of breaking news. But it was tonight on Twitter. Samoa Joe, NXT World Champion, took to Twitter to say that he is having to relinquish the NXT Championship. He claims it's due to injury and that he will be back to collect what is rightfully his. Samoa Joe just recently, at the last takeover, won that title from Karrion Kross as Kross was moving on up to the main roster and Raw. So if there were plans for Joe, then this obviously is derailing them or at least postponing them. So it's unclear at this point if this is a legit injury that he sustained, or is this perhaps part of the rebrand that is occurring beginning this week on NXT? Tuesday night's show is the new era, NXT 2.0, as it's being billed, and new theme, new color scheme, new behind the scenes folks running the show. Reports are Vince McMahon, Bruce Pritchard et al. Are going to be more involved in the process. Younger stars are going to be featured. Obviously, that wouldn't include Samoa Joe as a younger star. So is this a legit move, or is this a resetting of the table? Next week, you can join us here on the Two Bros Wrestling Show. We'll have initial reactions to what we think of the rebrand. But beyond that, we're going to, in our next slate of new episodes in October, after we get past the pay-per-view, these next couple of weeks of previews and reviews as we do. In October, we're going to give it a month. We're going to let NXT's rebrand take hold and sort of assess where we are a month from now and see what we like and don't like about it. Give them a fair shake and see if it is the NXT as we like to remember it, or if they've ruined one of our favorite brands out there. So whatever is in store for NXT, at least in the short term, it is not going to include Samoa Joe, sadly. But anyway, moving on into other non-breaking news. But hey, have you heard about CM Punk? We probably have. Obviously, the wrestling world has been buzz for the last few weeks. One of the things that happened while we've been off is the debut of CM Punk, the much anticipated and expected debut. But good news, folks. If you've not yet received your contract from AEW, keep checking the mail because it's very likely on the way. They're hiring everybody. If you missed the All Out pay-per-view, we had not one, not two, but three significant signings in the former Ruby Riott, now Ruby Soho, the former Daniel Bryan, now using his real name of, going back to the real name of Bryan Danielson, and then, of course, Adam Cole, baby. Three really big debuts. And what is interesting to me with AEW, you can look at the CM Punk, and you could argue that even though it's nice and it's buzzy, that he's more in line with your Christian Cage kind of signing. Maybe not a big show. I know he's more important than that, but I mean just someone who's more on the back end with more career behind them than still left in front of them. You could look at a Ruby and say and argue. I would argue that she falls into that Miro type of category of, or FTR guys who or gals who were lost in the shuffle, who were still young talents that were being misutilized or underutilized by WWE. And then you have something kind of new, I think, in a Daniel Bryan and a Adam Cole. Sure, Daniel Bryan, is not young by any means, but on the other hand, these aren't folks who were either out of the WWE picture or just underutilized in the overall WWE picture. You're talking about an Adam Cole, a headliner at NXT for the last several years, and someone who headlined the most recent NXT takeover for WrestleMania weekend. And WrestleMania weekend, Daniel Bryan, he headlined WrestleMania itself. So you're talking about, in the not so distant past, two performers that were not just on the card, but at the very, very tops of the card, and yet WWE allowed them to walk, to sign elsewhere, to not get in a bidding war for their services, for whatever variety of reasons they may have. It's really interesting to me that this could be the turning point. Not that we haven't had other significant signings in the past, but WWE, I don't know, has been overly concerned about AEW until relatively recently. Not that they haven't had them on their radar, but I think they were far in the rear view to them, and they're probably closer to WWE than WWE ever realized. AEW was obviously the hip alternative, the new kids on the block, so to speak, but I think they now see themselves as viable, not just alternative, but competition. And WWE, through some of the moves they're making, or I think even more importantly than what AEW feels about itself, I think the fact that WWE is realizing that, oh, these guys are competition for us. It could be interesting. Great time to be a wrestling fan, obviously. And moving on to other news, Triple H, who has not had a great couple of months, obviously, with the rebrand of NXT, perhaps some of the power structure changing and some of his power in NXT be taken away, wrongly being accused, really, for NXT falling in the ratings war to AEW. Not sure you can lay that at Triple H's feet. But his rough summer continues, as this week it was announced by WWE that Triple H had surgery for what they explained was a cardiac event. They didn't really go into any more detail than that. They also said, though, that this surgery was successful and that the game is expected to make a full recovery. So get well soon, Triple H, and happy there that everything went well. Amidst, though, these creative shakeups at NXT, while we're on that topic, apparently layoffs there continue, as this weekend a further round of layoffs of behind-the-scenes individuals, those on the production side, were let go. Numbers were not really readily available as to how many people this would mean, though it was stated that we pretty much have a skeleton crew that is now out there and going to be part of this rebranding of NXT. So let's see if that shows on camera, if we can tell that there's just not enough folks to handle the production at the level that we're used to at NXT or not. But sad for those folks, obviously, that are losing their jobs amidst all of these changes. In some news that's a lot more positive, and this is the, instead of the retractions that we're seeing like in the NXT world, these are additions. We have a lot of programming, new programming to talk about in the world of professional wrestling, as if you don't have enough to keep up with already. But Major League Wrestling is set to premiere a new series, MLW Fusion Alpha, and that's going to premiere on the 22nd of this month on their YouTube channels on Wednesdays, and then on Saturdays and Mondays on BN Sports, where they air their other show, MLW Fusion. This is, according to their release, going to feature interpromotional clashes, big matches, shocking alliances, and most importantly, for the creative version of this show, to give it its little wrinkle compared to their other series, is this one is going to have the storyline booking, anyway, of their new matchmaker. coming in from Lucha Underground. If you all were familiar with the Lucha Underground product, what you have is Don Cueto, and he is the one who is supposedly on air. They're going to be the authority figure and the one making the matches. So we could have a very heavy Lucha focus on this program. MLW does some great work, so stay tuned to that. Could be exciting. Other changes happening in the world of professional wrestling programming, and that is new things happening with AEW Dark. Dark this weekend had its first set of tapings in a studio environment. Typically, Dark has always been produced by having matches either before or after live editions of Dynamite, and now most recently Rampage. They would tape these matches and they would put them together in AEW Dark to air on their YouTube channel. They're moving away from that. It's not going to be a complete move. There's still going to be some occasions where they're going to be doing the broadcast from an arena along when they do their other tapings. But they did several sets of tapings yesterday, one in the mid-morning and one in the afternoon in 3-hour blocks to sort of stockpile some footage for a new version of AEW Dark. I'm actually kind of excited to see what this new vision might be like and hope that it improves. I've had some complaints here on AEW Dark about some missed opportunities they have with this format, and hopefully this will help them better utilize that time and that talent and give it a different look and not just look like Dynamite Light or Dynamite before the crowd shows up kind of feel to it. So let's see how this looks. Picture, if you will, maybe a NWA Power, or as Tony Khan mentioned in an interview, he sort of sees it along the lines of the old WCW Saturday Night Show from the 1990s, which was filmed at Disney Studios. Well, Dark filmed theirs at Universal Studios, which has a long wrestling history as well, as it used to be the site many years ago of the earlier versions of Impact when they were known as TNA wrestling. So there is a legacy there with Universal Studios. Let's see how this turns out. I'm kind of excited. I'm not sure when those are going to start airing, but they did film some this weekend. More news when it comes to programming. This not wrestling per se, but wrestling related for certain. Netflix has a new interactive special coming out called Escape the Undertaker. You heard that right. Escape the Undertaker, which premieres October 5th, just in time for Halloween. And if you're not familiar with Netflix's interactive programming, those fans who may have also been fans of like Black Mirror, for example. Black Mirror's had an episode where it's sort of a choose-your-own-adventure style. And that's what this is supposed to be. And I'm going to read this from the press release. But in this interactive film, WWE superstar The Undertaker has set a trap for the decorated tag team, The New Day, at his mansion. What they don't know is that The Undertaker's mansion is an extreme haunted house, packed to the brim with supernatural challenges, and it's up to viewers to decide the fate of these three poor souls trying to survive the wrath of The Undertaker. So if that sounds like you, be sure to tune in this October for The Undertaker interactive special on Netflix. Maybe if you're the right age, this could be kind of fun, or it could be a complete mess and something that we might lampoon here as a botch of the week on the Two Bros Wrestling Show. It could go either way, so let's stay tuned together and see how that all shakes out. Tonight, Ring of Honor is hosting Death Before Dishonor on pay-per-view. And as part of this card, they will be crowning their first World Women's Champion. The tournament finals tonight feature Miranda Elise versus Roxy. And the whole tournament is played out on Ring of Honor television. It has been really fantastic. I would highly recommend that if you didn't see any of it, you go back and watch it. It featured a lot of women who many of you will be familiar with, such highly touted folks like Angelina Love, Allison Kay, Quinn McKay, but really the reason to go check things out is it featured a lot of lesser-known female talent, just to show how deep the female talent is out in the world of professional wrestling right now. I became familiar for the first time with the two finalists, for example, that are fighting for the championship tonight, as well as Max the Impaler and Trish Adora. Adora in particular, Trish Adora really got my attention. She has a unique look, and honestly, since since maybe Devlin side probably has the coolest finishing maneuver name in the Lariat Tubman. I mean, come on. How fantastic is that? As soon as I heard that, I'm like, yeah, this lady's great. I love that. But yeah, so congratulations to whichever Miranda Blaze or Roxy walks away with the women's championship tonight. It was announced this week that The Miz will be following in the long lines of Stacy Keibler and Nikki Bella before him, and participating in an upcoming season of ABC's Dancing with the Stars. And if that's your thing, you can tune in and watch The Miz. He's going to, I think they premiere September 20th, and watch him compete against the likes of Sporty Spice, Olympian Sonny Lee, as well as Brian Austin Green. So if that's your thing, then go root on The Miz as he represents the world of professional wrestling on the insanely popular Dancing with the Stars TV program. A major signing was announced this week by WWE. That is news in and of itself. As we've noted, this year has been full of so many releases that to hear them signing folks is actually a bit of a rarity. But in this instance, what they're doing is they are looking for the next Brock Lesnar, the next Bobby Lashley, the next Kurt Angle, and that they're going into the amateur ranks. And they couldn't have come up with a bigger name and a bigger signing in the amateur ranks than Gable Stevenson. Stevenson is the reigning NCAA national champion, as well as a recent Olympic gold medalist. And another thing that makes this particularly noteworthy is this is WWE's first NIL deal, and that's the new rule where NCAA athletes are now allowed to capitalize on their status, their personalities, their likeness for monetary gain without losing their college eligibility. So what makes this particularly unusual in the case of WWE is that according to WWE's own press release, Stevenson's going to join the WWE roster, presumably at the Performance Center, not on air, but still, he's joining the roster while at the same time defending his NCAA title for the University of Minnesota. Very interesting, and will be interesting to watch his career as is moving forward. And then finally, in news tonight, we're going to end with some condolences to the family and friends of Shannon Claire Spurl. Shannon was better known in the wrestling world as Daphne. If you're an old school fan, you'll remember Daphne from her days in WCW in the late 90s, early 2000s. She tragically took her life after a posting, basically a plea, cry for help on social media. She read a suicide note and was holding a pistol during an Instagram live, and then when wellness check was done, and unfortunately what they found was again very unfortunate. And this is the second notable death in as many years of a female performer by suicide, and it highlights the need for mental health services for professional wrestlers, and especially I think in the instance of after their careers are over, that those resources still be readily available to those who need the help. I know WWE with their wellness program, they offer the drug rehabilitation and the like to past performers. It's what helped save the lives of Jake the Snake Roberts and Scott Hall, amongst many others who've taken advantage of the program years after their time in the spotlight. There definitely needs to be something of a very similar nature set up for the mental health of these athletes, so that stories like this are things we can stop having to report on. So again, our condolences to the former co-workers, the family, the friends, the fans of Daphne, and again, sad story, and hopefully one that we do not see continuing to repeat itself. So with all of that said, that is the opening bell. So it's time to move to our main event topic, and tonight we're talking the Ultimate Warrior. Why are we talking the Ultimate Warrior? Kevin, isn't it 2021? Well, it is, but we are still talking about the Ultimate Warrior because the world of professional wrestling still talks about the Ultimate Warrior. WWE still talks about the Ultimate Warrior. Case in point, this past summer, WWE had an arrangement with A&E and their biography series to feature one a week, a series of biographies where they highlighted in really well done documentaries on some of their biggest talents like Stone Cold Steve Austin, Mick Foley, and they chose to put Ultimate Warrior in that mix. Interesting enough, it wasn't a week later that the Dark Side of the Ring, the very popular and I would say highly recommended by myself series on Vice Network, they did their own series, story, documentary, completely based on Ultimate Warrior. Obviously, Dark Side of the Ring, it's right there in the title. Theirs was a less varnished take, if you will, on what the WWE scrubbed version on A&E was. So here they are, people still talking about this man because honestly, he is a very complex and complicated case study in the history of pro wrestling that still continues to sort of confound people to this day. I would argue that there is very little precedent and talents that I can think of personally whose legacy, for better and worse, and influence, for better and worse, so outshines the amount of time that they were actually in the ring. The Ultimate Warrior's career was not that long. And yet here we are, this many years past his death and decades beyond his active period in wrestling, still talking about him as WWE and the world of professional wrestling still continues to talk about him in documentaries that, like the dueling ones that aired this summer. So is his influence more for the positive, more for the negative? Was one documentary more clear-eyed than the other, one more fair than the other? Or is the truth somewhere in the middle? And naturally, nothing is ever black or white. It's usually shades of gray, and that's really where this falls into as well. Let's go back really and start at the beginning of the story for Ultimate Warrior. My first exposure to Warrior was through the old aftermags. A lot of you old school fans may have been subscribers to Pro Wrestling Illustrated or the like, and that's how I kept up with the world of professional wrestling in the 1980s, amongst those territories that I did not see. I loved watching Mid-Atlantic and George Championship Wrestling, WWE, but most of the world of professional wrestling back in the days before YouTube and the internet, it was only accessible to you through reading about it in the magazines, or if you were older than I was at the time, more sophisticated than I was at the time, you probably did some tape trading on VHS or what have you. But the Ultimate Warrior to me was a photo in a magazine, and it was, I remember, World Class Wrestling. That's where he debuted. There was this tag team called, not World Class, it was Mid-South, and they were the Blade Runners. And the Blade Runners were made up of Blade Runner Rock, who would eventually become the Dingo Warrior, and then, of course, Ultimate Warrior when he moved on to WWE. But he was teaming with Blade Runner Sting, and I probably don't have to tell you who Blade Runner Sting ends up becoming later on. But when I first saw them with their face painted up and their muscles rippling in Pro Wrestling Illustrated or Inside Wrestling, one of those, first thing I thought was just a cheap clone of the Road Warriors. And honestly, that is probably what Bill Watts there in Mid-South, the promoter, probably what he was intending was to have his version of the Road Warriors. Rumor has it that it was his attempt to sort of poke fun at the Road Warriors and by doing sort of a parody version of them. But what you had was two really significant careers that ended up getting kicked off by these guys that were not good at the time, that were very, very green, but it was the start and my first exposure to Ultimate Warrior. I really wouldn't see Ultimate Warrior through either that period or his brief time in World Class. It was when he got to WWE that I and most of the world first took notice of Jim Hellwig and the character, the Ultimate Warrior. At the time, I didn't think much of him either. Had Doug been able to join this broadcast, I was going to ask him at this point what his first memories of Warrior were and what he thought. But, you know, I know how Doug felt about Hulk Hogan, and same for me. And I, you know, as an NWA kid, watching Hulk Hogan and his overly sanitized, say your prayers, eat your vitamins act, where he was a superhero character that didn't feel pain and didn't take bumps. And all I saw when I saw Ultimate Warrior is I saw a retread of that. To me, it was just another version of Hulk Hogan, a muscular guy that was made for small kids to cheer, that was not a great wrestler and not, to me, an entertaining performer. I was a very jaded kid. Again, NWA fan though. I was raised on Southern wrestling, and I wanted to see wrestling, not Ultimate Warrior run to the ring, shake the ropes, and win in 30 seconds any more than I wanted to see Hulk Hogan rip off his shirt, do a leg drop, and win in 30 seconds. So I was not a big fan at the time, and that's without knowing some of the difficulties that Jim Hellwig was producing backstage and amongst those that had to work with him, because he was notoriously difficult to work with. And, for wrestling fans, if particularly now where we are all critics, right? That's what this show is critiquing professional wrestling, analyzing professional wrestling, but we analyze it from, the components that we feel make up good wrestling. You grade a man or woman on his or her mic skills and his or her abilities in the ring. And Jim Hellwig did not have either of those things. He was not good in the ring. He did not get better with time. He stayed green. He stayed dangerous to work with. His promos were notoriously bad. The only way that they became, they sort of went from being bad and crossing the line to entertaining, and that they were just so bad that they had to be seen to be believed, because at times he was practically incoherent and almost comical fashion without him necessarily attempting to be comical. So why is it that Ultimate Warrior is still being talked about? Well, because we fans may look at mic skills, we may look at mat skills, promoters look at money. And Ultimate Warrior was a very successful character for Vince McMahon and the WWE. He was very popular. In fact, he began to rival Hulk Hogan in popularity. Sold lots of dolls, sold lots of toys, sold lots of foam figures and ice cream bars, one could imagine. So, all Vince cared about was that Ultimate Warrior was making money. It made him more likely to put up with the antics of Jim Hellwig during the reign, as it were, that time in the 80s when Ultimate Warrior really did rival Hulk Hogan for popularity. And I will say, devil his due, the only real memorable match I can recall from Ultimate Warrior that actually, even looking back, still stands up as a pretty good match was, ironically enough, the match he had at WrestleMania with Hulk Hogan. Of all people, you would think these two notoriously bad workers would produce a notoriously bad match, particularly on such a big stage at WrestleMania. But this is one of those instances where the stars must have aligned just right, and that these two were able to bring the best out of each other for one night only. I think a lot of it was the atmosphere of WrestleMania, the fact that at the time you didn't see a lot of good guy versus good guy. If you did, it was considered a technical match where you had two guys who were maybe really versed in mat wrestling, mixed martial arts style wrestling, or hook wrestling, amateur wrestling, and it was just a clean contest of let's see who's the better man. Well, Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior, neither one, were built for technical wrestling, so you wouldn't think that they'd be able to pull off a match that was more than a few minutes long, which is what they were used to, and yet they main evented WrestleMania, and the hot crowd, I think, really aided them into taking it above and beyond what really both of their abilities should indicated they were able to do. So that match was memorable, probably the only memorable match of Ultimate Warrior's career, and in many ways one could look at it and say it was his downfall, because it was really Jim Hellwig starting to believe in his own mind that he was as good as, or as popular as, Hulk Hogan, that started his fall from grace. He became even more difficult to work with backstage and started making more demands, wanting things very similar, money-wise, and everything else to what Hulk Hogan was getting, until it was the point that no one wanted to work with him, and Vince had enough. And when Jim threatened to take his ball and go home, several instances occurred where that did happen, and they would take each other back, make amends. But one day the break was completely clean and irreversible, and thus ended Jim Hellwig's very, very short reign near the top of the professional wrestling world. And if that were all that Jim Hellwig had, perhaps we wouldn't still be talking about him today. But there comes the point where Jim Hellwig, post-career, starts to become more known for all the wrong reasons than even he did during his time on top of the wrestling spotlight. And that's because when the internet really started to take hold after Jim Hellwig's career was over with, and he became an online blogger. And as an online blogger, and personality, someone who used to have a name and therefore people would follow. That's when he really began to push buttons. He was a very big fan of right-wing media and got so involved with that he began expressing his opinions. And your opinions are fine to express, whatever your personal opinions are. We don't care here on the Two Bros Wrestling Show. We just care about respect, and that's the thing, that you can disagree without being disagreeable. And Jim Hellwig did not care to be disagreed with. So if you did not believe in his brand of politics, he was quick to be insultive and demeaning, and oftentimes just morally reprehensible in these blog posts with the language he used and some of the opinions that he expressed. And this was taken to even further extreme as he ventured away from just being a keyboard warrior and going out into the public speaking realm. Again, this is a man who was notoriously difficult to work with, had a massive ego, and you could just say he was crazy. And there's certainly enough evidence out there with some of the things he said and did that would lend you to believe that that's not just a characterization of insulting someone, that there might actually been some mental issues at play here by some of his behavior. For example, he so believed in the warrior character that he thought he was the warrior character, to the extent that he officially changed his name to Warrior after his career was over with. Obviously, Vince McMahon owned the Ultimate Warrior, so he himself went and trademarked and named himself legitimately Warrior, first name and last name. So yes, his real name in life at the end was Warrior. That alone maybe indicates that they're not necessarily dealing with a sound mind. And as he took that not sound mind and some of these controversial beliefs into the real world, it's inevitable that he is going to be met with resistance. So again, we're talking, the not so far past, but far enough away that the idea of going viral was still new. So 20 some years ago, Jim Hellwig did a very infamous, I guess you would say, speaking engagement at a college where some students who obviously were upset that the university was allowing him to come and speak on campus, considering his controversial online presence, they came to challenge him. And again, Ultimate Warrior, or Warrior as he would have been at this time, did not like to be challenged or questioned. So during the course of the presentation, when it came time for Q&A and some of the students in attendance took umbrage to some of the things that Mr. Hellwig had said, he did not just let's agree to disagree. It went viral because of just how vehement it was, and he used some very derogatory and homophobic language when shouting these kids down, and it really ruined what little bit of credibility he may have had left as anything more than just a crazy loon at that point, because a lot of his online content could then be pulled out by folks who maybe hadn't been paying attention, and they go back and look in the archives and they see racist comments or misogynistic comments or homophobic comments. And so he really was a pariah, and as such, and one who had long since burned his bridges with WWE. WWE in the early 2000s very famously did a documentary called The Self-Destruction of the Ultimate Warrior, and this was one of the most financially successful DVDs that WWE had ever done. They'd done a lot of behind the scenes or tragic stories like that of the Von Erichs, or the rise and fall of AEW, or I'm sorry, not AEW, AWA. That was another from that time period. But I think that the key here is right there in the title, in the self-destruction. They were very much putting it at the feet of Jim Hellwig himself for being his own worst enemy and the only person that could truly be blamed for his fall from grace. And it was a hatchet job, and there was no doubt about it that it was a documentary put together with an agenda. It is said, and it is true, that history is written by the winners, and when it comes to wrestling history, it is always written by WWE, because they have been the one who are the last one standing and pretty much own most of wrestling history, so they get to reshape it and retell it the way that they choose to, much less when it's their own wrestling history, as it is with the Ultimate Warrior. So they use this to make fun of his, show those old promos, make fun of his nonsensical promo style and his erratic behavior and all the things he had done to basically end his own career. Needless to say, this did not go over very well with Warrior and further strained the relationship as if there was any chance of reconciliation. Until, of course, there was, because you never say never in the world of professional wrestling, especially when there's money involved. And I don't mean to just look at it crassly, but why else would WWE choose to bury the hatchet and make amends with Jim Hellwig, which at the end of his life they did. Famously brought him in, managed to talk him into accepting a Hall of Fame induction. He does so. He does some niceties with WWE, appears on Raw, gives one final speech, talks about one day every man breathes his last breath, his heart beats its last beats, yada yada, goes home and dies pretty much instantly. And it really was a sad end to what is kind of a sad story and a sad, maybe unhappy person in their life. And if that was the end of the story, then we would definitely still be talking in terms of just how complicated a figure he was. I'm not here to speak ill of the dead, but we also have to look at the fact that you don't glamorize what someone did in life if it wasn't, something that you want to associate your company with. If there is those things that you should maybe distance yourself from, and you talk about a 180. Here's the company that did the self-destruction of Ultimate Warrior, that this summer is doing this glowing AEW or A&E biography on him. And in that A&E biography, Dana Warrior, the widow of Ultimate Warrior, gives a apology really for his behavior there with the during the time of the public speaking incident. And that is all well and good, but obviously it's not the same as coming from the man himself. So, to WWE's credit, they didn't completely gloss over it, but it definitely was a much smaller part in the story of Ultimate Warrior, and was framed in such a way that she was allowed to do the apologizing for him and saying that he was not really in his right mind at the time and didn't really mean the things in the way that they were taken, and that wasn't, that was him on his worst day. And I understand that none of us are the product, or should be defined rather, by the worst things we've ever done or said, that we're all more complicated than that. But with Jim Hellwig, it was consistent enough that it wasn't just the one incident they were addressing there. It was a pattern of behavior and language and things that he had done through the years that gave a really more broader picture as to what the real man's views and beliefs probably were. Interestingly enough, the WWE produced documentary on A&E, while it was more squeaky clean other than brushing past the controversy there, the Darkside of the Ring documentary was much closer really in tone and content to what WWE had done 20 years earlier, which, though a hatchet job, is probably closer to honest than what they did when they self-produced with A&E, the more recent biography that tries to clean up Ultimate Warrior's image a little bit. Also interesting to note that while the A&E documentary talks to Dana Warrior, that it's not the widow, but on Darkside of the Ring, it's the first wife of Ultimate Warrior who is the source and of content and as an interview subject. And interestingly enough, she doesn't so much talk about his political beliefs as the drug addiction and the misogyny and the cheating and the physical abuse that she suffered at the hands of Warrior. And obviously anyone can say something about someone who's no longer with us, and you don't want to necessarily think that there's not when no one's here to defend themselves, but there is enough smoke there that one has to wonder if there's fire, which kind of brings me to my overall point and where I land when it comes to which Ultimate Warrior is the real Ultimate Warrior. It's sad. It's just sad that Jim Hellwig left behind small children and a widow. And as I mentioned earlier, though, you don't have to necessarily talk ill of the dead to not decide you're going to whitewash their controversial legacy. See, WWE has named an award after this man. They decided a few years ago, as part of the Hall of Fame induction ceremony, that they would start handing out the Warrior Award, which is essentially basically a humanitarian award. Folks who help make the world better through philanthropy or their work or their spirit or something that they've done, and they've named it after a man who didn't really show those kinds of kindnesses in his real life. And that's where we are still talking about Ultimate Warrior today, and why we should, in that, we don't have to sit around and talk ill of Jim Hellwig after his death. They just don't need to necessarily have an award that is named after him, when it's very well documented that he is probably not the right person to have a award, particularly one that's a humanitarian award, named after him. A few years ago, when the WWE decided to start having a women's battle royal at WrestleMania, they initially titled it the Fabulous Moolah Women's Battle Royal, and quickly changed that, took her name off of it when enough folks came forward to say that Moolah was not necessarily the best representation of gender equality, that she was not herself very kind to a lot of the women in her charge, or those, she wasn't so quick to want to help other women get a leg up in the business, and was really keeping women down and worse. And so, because of the controversy, WWE quickly changed course and took her name off of that. So why in the world they're so insistent on continuing to push the legacy of Ultimate Warrior as some sort of great humanitarian, when his widow is every year at the Hall of Fame handing this award out, is just a reminder of the gap between the reality of the man and the image that they're trying to portray, when it would just be easier to chalk it up as someone who has a complicated legacy and move on and move past them and give that award a different title. So what do you think? What's your opinion of Ultimate Warrior? How he should be remembered, how he should be honored, and whether or not we should be keeping the Warrior Award as something to fashion in his memory and every year tie to him as some great humanitarian, which he most certainly was not. So let us know what you think in the comments below, and that is the main event topic for tonight. So we will move on to the big finish. If you're first time joining us, first time viewer, the big finish is where Doug and I, we talk about the 1, 2, 3, and that's the botch of the week, the performer of the week, and our match of the week. I'm going to start with the botch of the week, and I'm going to give it this week to Impact Wrestling with their Impact Plus app. If you are familiar with the Impact Plus app, it's basically their version of the WWE Network or Honor Club. It's their streaming service, and there's a lot of free content on there, as well as there's a paid subscription layer. But one thing that Impact has done since they first launched this app is that they allowed the Impact Wrestling show, their weekly programming, to air for free on that app. So if you did not receive Access Network, which is the cable channel that carries Impact on a weekly basis, I don't. If you do not have access to Access, this was a way that you could keep up with the product. And I kept up with it that way, and obviously I'm a fan, and that's one reason I'm doing it. But two, I do this show, and I feel kind of an obligation to watch as much wrestling and as much variety of wrestling to be able to comment on it and report on it to the best of my ability for everyone else as well. And now I can't, unless I was to pay the subscription price, I can no longer follow it, because apparently they have put their Impact weekly show, instead of being free, it's now under the paid layer of that subscription program, and so you can no longer access it without paying. Obviously, most of us subscribe to multiple streaming services at this point, so maybe in the future I will do that, but I just think that when you're wanting people to follow your product, the weekly show should always be free. If it's airing on cable or YouTube or your app, your weekly programming should be free. Let the folks follow the storylines, then they buy the pay-per-views, then they buy the merch, then they buy the tickets to go see you when you come to your town. So having everything now under that paid subscription level is not exactly user and fan friendly. So botch of the week to Impact for locking down the Impact Wrestling show off of the Impact Plus app. Moving on to my performer of the week. This one maybe is a little on the nose, but how could it be anything but CM Punk? I mean, come on. CM Punk has ruled the wrestling world, ruled the minds of the wrestling world, and the printed space that the mainstream media has used on the wrestling world over the last 3 weeks. Uh, and it's deserved. He performed it all out. He didn't do a ton, honestly, in the match that was crazy, and it's probably smart that they didn't try that. They kept it simple, which was probably a good move for a man who hadn't been in the ring in seven years. Still, everything he needed to do, he did. Everything that was asked of him, he did crisply, and no botches, did not show signs of ring rust. He looked in shape. He looked motivated. He looked older, but he did not look old, and that's sometimes a problem for people coming back after a long layoff. But not the case at all for CM Punk. He looked great, and he sounded great. That's even more important. Honestly, his match was great. It was fine. It was what it needed to be. But beyond that, the reason he's still the toast of the wrestling world is that he has become must-see TV. Every time he takes a microphone, famously, he's been good on the mic his whole career. He still has that spark. Every time he's taken a microphone on either Rampage or Dynamite, you want to listen. It draws you in. I know it's still new and it's still shiny and it may wear off, but right now the crowd reactions are taking him over the top, and that goodwill still exists. And so, where does he go from here after Darby Allin? It looks like he's maybe in line for a feud with Taz and his folks there in that particular stable. So stay tuned. I'm eager to see where it goes, and I'm sure you all are as well. But there's just no way I could give my performer of the week to anyone but CM Punk, who is killing the game right now, and it's good to see him back. And whoever thought that we would, especially under a banner that wasn't WWE. So nice to see. And then I will end with match of the week. And I'm not just doing this in honor of Doug and the fact he's not here to do it himself, but I'm giving it to AEW. They produced a great, newsworthy, pay-per-view with all the debuts. Daniel Bryan. I want to have a hard time. I want to say Daniel Bryan still, but Bryan Danielson and Adam Cole. I mean, all of that obviously is going to get attention. CM Punk's first match. It was a well-reviewed pay-per-view. There was a lot of great matches on the show, but none greater than, it takes a lot to stand out from such a stacked card, but stand out they did. The Lucha Brothers versus the Young Bucks. Not only was this match of the night, early match of the year, for sure. The Lucha Brothers wrestled away the tag team championships from the Young Bucks. There were no chin locks here. We're talking about it had everything else. Non-stop action from beginning to end, high-flying, innovative spots. You had very sick bumps. You had blood. You had Tony Schiavone going nuts on the microphone because he was being annoyed to death by Don Callis joining the announce table. I mean, this was just high drama on from every angle. And it was a match of the year contender, and absolutely one that if you did not see, if you're a fan of tag team wrestling, if you are a fan of professional wrestling, go out of your way to see the Young Bucks versus the Lucha Brothers at this last pay-per-view, a standout match on a standout night. And with that, folks, we have reached the end of the Two Bros Wrestling Show. That's the big finish, and hopefully you'll join us next week. If this is your first time joining us, we are live on Facebook every Sunday night at 8 p.m., except those nights when we are having pay-per-view Sundays. In those instances, we are live immediately following the pay-per-view in order to give our analysis. So next week's show is going to be on a preview of Extreme Rules. And here's a preview I'll give you. Your boy is going to attend Extreme Rules. So happy, I'm very happy for me to be back in an arena to see live wrestling. And in 2 weeks, that means when we do our review show, you will have a in-person perspective of someone who was there in the arena. So next week, Doug should be back, and we will preview everything you need to know about Extreme Rules. Again, that's 8 p.m. live on Facebook. If you're watching on YouTube and you're watching one of these, if you've stumbled across us on YouTube and you're seeing one of these shows of ours in the archives, know that you can join us and participate in a live discussion if you come over to our Facebook channel. channel on Sunday nights at 8 p.m. Thank you, folks, for joining me and supporting the show and supporting me during a solo edition of the Two Bros Wrestling Show. We look forward to being back to Two Bros next week. We'll see you Sunday at 8 o'clock. Have a good week, everybody.